For most football fans, Roberto Baggio's story begins with a miss. A ball placed on a penalty spot, a nation holding its breath, and then the shot rising into the California sky. In an instant, one of football's greatest heroes became its most famous villain. But that's not really Roberto Baggio's story. Because before that moment, before the headlines, before the blame, there was a boy who spent his entire life fighting. Fighting injuries, fighting expectations, fighting heartbreak, and giving the world some of the most beautiful football it had ever seen. This is the story of Roberto Baggio, the man who carried Italy and the man football remembers all wrong. Italy has always been known as the land of defenders. Legends like Paolo Maldini, Franco Baresi, Fabio Cannavaro, warriors who built their reputation on discipline and strength. But from that same country emerged something completely different. An artist, a dreamer, a player who made football look effortless. Born in the small town of Caldogno, Baggio was already attracting attention as a child. By the age of 11, he had scored an astonishing number of goals in youth football. People didn't just talk about his talent, they talked about him like he was something special, something rare. And when you watch old footage of him, you understand why. The game seemed to slow down around him. Every touch felt deliberate, every movement elegant, as if football was following his rhythm. By 15, he was already playing senior football. The future looked limitless. Then everything changed. At just 18 years old, days before completing a dream move to Fiorentina, Baggio suffered a devastating knee injury. His ACL was torn, his meniscus destroyed. Doctors weren't sure if he would ever play again. Imagine that. Your entire life building towards one moment and suddenly being told it could all be over before it had even begun. For many players that would have been the end, but not for Roberto Baggio. Fiorentina believed in him, they signed him anyways, paid for his surgeries, waited for him, and Baggio spent months doing the only thing he knew, fighting. When he finally returned, football reminded him how cruel it could be. Another serious knee injury followed, more surgeries, more pain, more months away from the game. Fans began to wonder if he would ever fulfill his potential. But Baggio refused to give up. And when he returned once again, everything changed. Against Diego Maradona's Napoli, he scored a stunning free kick that helped save Fiorentina from relegation. It felt symbolic, a player who refused to be defeated, saving a club that refused to abandon him. From that moment onwards, Baggio exploded. Goals, assists, moments of magic. Every week, he seemed capable of something impossible. Soon, he wasn't just one of Italy's best players. Many believed he was the best. Then came the transfer that shook Italian football. In 1990, Juventus signed Roberto Baggio for a world record fee. The reaction in Florence was immediate and explosive. Because Juventus wasn't just another club. They were Fiorentina's bitter rivals. Fans felt betrayed. Riots broke out in the streets, dozens were injured, the city turned into chaos. And in the middle of it all stood Roberto Baggio, a player caught between two worlds. When he returned to Florence wearing Juventus colours, the atmosphere was hostile. Then something happened. Juventus won a penalty. Baggio was their designated taker, but he refused to take it. Later, he gave professional explanations, but everyone knew the truth. He couldn't bring himself to score against the club he still loved. As he left the pitch later that day, a Fiorentina scarf landed near him. He picked it up and held on to it. One simple gesture, but it revealed everything about who Roberto Baggio was. Not a villain, not a traitor, just a human being. Eventually, Juventus supporters embraced him too, because talent that extraordinary becomes impossible to ignore. In 1993, Baggio reached the peak of world football. He led Juventus to European glory, scored goals, created goals, dominated games. That year, he won the Ballon d'Or and was nominated FIFA World Player of the Year. For a boy once told he might never walk properly again, he had become the best player on earth. But club football wasn't where his legend would be written. It was with Italy. At the 1994 World Cup, Baggio carried an entire nation on his shoulders. The tournament started badly. Italy struggled. Nothing seemed to work. And then, when everything appeared lost, Baggio arrived. Against Nigeria, he saved Italy. Against Spain, he saved Italy again. Against Bulgaria, he carried them to the final. 5 goals in the knockout rounds. One man dragging a country towards a dream. By the time Italy reached the World Cup final, Roberto Baggio wasn't just their star, he was their hope. But even heroes have their limits. Before the final against Brazil, Baggio injured his hamstring. He wasn't fit, he could barely even move freely, yet he played anyway, because he couldn't imagine letting his country down. For 120 exhausting minutes, neither team found a breakthrough. Everything came down to penalties. The cruelest way football can separate joy from heartbreak. As Baggio stepped forward for Italy's final kick, millions believed he would score. Why wouldn't they? He was Roberto Baggio, Italy's greatest player, their best penalty taker, the savior. He placed the ball down, walked backwards, took a long breath, and struck it. The ball flew over the bar. Brazil were world champions. Then came the image that would follow him forever. Baggio standing alone, head lowered, frozen, while celebration erupted around him. Football can be brutally unfair, because what happened next was even worse. People forgot everything else. They forgot Nigeria, they forgot Spain, they forgot Bulgaria. They forgot the player who had carried Italy to the final almost single-handedly. All they remembered was a miss. One kick, one moment, one mistake. And suddenly a lifetime of brilliance was reduced to a single image. But Baggio refused to let that be the end. 4 years later, at another World Cup, he stepped up to take another penalty for Italy. Imagine the courage that required. After everything, after the criticism, after the nightmares. And this time, he scored. Not because it erased the pain, but because it proved something important. The strongest people aren't the ones who never fail. They are the ones who find a way to keep going. Today, football remembers the miss, but real football fans remember the man. They remember the genius, the creativity, the courage, the elegance. They remember that Roberto Baggio scored over 100 penalties during his career, that he was one of the greatest Italian players ever, and that football was more beautiful whenever he touched the ball. Because the truth is simple, Baggio's story was never about the penalty he missed. It was about everything he overcame before and after it. The injuries, the pressure, the heartbreak, the expectations of an entire nation, and the courage to stand up every single time he was knocked down. Today, Baggio lives a quiet life, far away from football spotlight. No constant cameras, no endless interviews, no noise, just peace. Maybe that's fitting, because after carrying the weight of a nation for so many years, he finally gets to put it down. And perhaps that's how Roberto Baggio should be remembered. Not as the man who missed, but as the man who never stopped getting back up.